Long before the first sword clanged against shield, before clocks, before castles, even before roads, there was the age of stone, and in the land we now call Wales, in the shadow of myths older than myth, the people lived in caves, made weapons from flint, and feared one thing above all else: iron. But this isn't a story about war, it's a story about love, about fear, about transformation, about a fairy so strong and so clever and so heartbreakingly human she broke her own laws and paid the price. I'm MT Lynx, and this is Storybite, where we devour the most powerful stories of the past to feed our storytelling future. Today we're diving deep into one of the most quietly devastating and beautifully constructed Welsh tales I've ever read, The Touch of Iron. If you've ever been drawn into stories of forbidden love, broken vows, and fairy rules that echo through generations, hit that subscribe button now, because this one is going to haunt you. The Stone Age before the Cymry. The Touch of Iron. Ages ago, before the Cymry rode in their coracles across the sea, there was a race of men already in the land of honey, as Great Britain was then called. These ancient people who lived in caves did not know how to build houses or to plough the ground. They had no idea they could get their food out of the earth. As for making bread and pies, cookies and goodies from what they grew from the soil, they never heard of such a thing. They were not acquainted with the use of fire for melting copper, nor did they know how to get iron out of the ore to make knives and spears, arrowheads and swords, and armour and helmets. All they could do was mould clay so as to make things to cook with and hold milk or water. When they baked this soft stuff in the fire, they found they had pots, pans, dishes, all hard as stone, though they were easily broken. To hunt the deer or fight the wolves and bears, they fashioned clubs of wood. For javelins and arrows, they took hard stone, like flint, and chipped it to points and sharpened it with edges. This was the time which men now call the Stone Age. When the men went to war, their weapons were wholly of wood or stone. They had not yet learned to weave the wool of the sheep into warm clothing, but they wore the skins of animals. Each one of the caves in which they lived was a general boarding house for dogs, pigs, and people. When a young man of one tribe wanted a wife, he sallied out secretly into another neighbourhood. There he lay in wait for a girl to come along, and then ran away with her and back to his own daddy's cave. This isn't your standard fairy tale opener. This is no grand quest, no chosen one, no prophecy. What we get instead is a world in transition, a moment suspended between the eras. Kind of like waiting for the next Taylor Swift album to come out, am I right? And before the first character even walks onto the page, we're told about a people of clay and fire, of caves and flint, humans so ancient they barely touch the concept of technology. And that detail, land of honey, that's not random. That's nostalgia baked into the geography. This land isn't Britain, not yet. It hasn't been conquered or renamed. It's sweet, primal, ancient. This is a story about to clash two civilizations, one made of flint and fur, the other of iron and strategy. And we, the readers, are positioned right in the middle. Witnesses to the collision. Writers, take note. By giving us a world before names, the story invites us to feel that shift in our bones. It's not just about who arrives, it's about what gets lost when they do. Iron as a revolution and rejection. By and by, when the Cymry came to the land, they had iron tools and better weapons. Then there were many and long battles, and the Aborigines were beaten many times. So the cave people hated everything made of iron. Any one of the cave people, boy or girl, who had picked up iron ornaments or were found wearing or using iron tools, or buying anything of iron from the cave people's enemies, was looked upon as a rascal or a villain or even a traitor and was driven off from the tribe. However, some of the daughters of the cavemen were so pretty and had such rosy cheeks and lovely bodies and beautiful long hair that quite often the Cymric youth fell in love with them. Many of the cavemen's daughters were captured and became wives of the Cymry and mothers of children. In course of ages, their descendants helped to make the bright, witty, song-loving Welsh people. Let's pause. This isn't just a metaphor for change. It's a declaration of cultural trauma. To the cave people, iron isn't progress, it's pain, it's invasion. It's the spear that beat their club, the blade that shattered their peace. And that hate runs deep, so deep that touching iron, using it, wearing it, even admiring it, becomes grounds for exile. This is a society built on memory, and memory, when twisted by grief, becomes law. What we're seeing here is the birth of a taboo, a shared cultural defense mechanism. And if you're a writer, this is gold. This is how you build believable world tension. Because the best taboos don't just exist, they have a backstory. And here, iron isn't just a material, it's a trigger, a scar, a symbol of everything that was lost when the New World arrived. Fairy lore and the ancient order. Now, the fairies usually like all things that are old, and they are very slow to alter the ancient customs to which they've been used to. For, in the fairy world, there is no measure of time, nor clocks, watches, or bells to strike the hours, and no almanacs or calendars. The fairies cannot understand why ladies change fashion so often, and why the men change their way of doing things. They wonder why beards are fashionable at one time, then moustaches, long or short, at another, or smooth faces when razors are cheap. Most fairies like to keep on doing the same thing in the old way. They enjoy being like the mountains, which stand, or the sea that rolls, or the sun that rises and sets every day and forever. They never get tired of repeating tomorrow what they did yesterday. They are very different from the people that are always wanting something else, and even cry if they cannot have it. This is the reason why the fairies did not like iron, or to see men wearing iron hats and clothes they called helmets and armour, when they went to fight. They no more wanted to be touched by iron than by filth or foul disease. They hated knives, stirrups, scythes, swords, pots, pans, kettles, all this metal in any form, whether sheet, barbed wire, lump, or pig iron. And now the story shifts from the real-world clash of cultures to the mythic realm, and immediately we're told the fairies are different, not just in form, but in philosophy. Fairies in this world are timeless, tradition-bound, eternal, and their hatred of iron, it's not just a preference, it's sacred. This passage echoes what we saw earlier with the cave people, but magnifies it, because while humans learn to adapt, the fairies are fixed in place. They stand like the mountains, they roll like the sea, and anything that breaks that rhythm, anything that represents change, is treated like corruption. So when iron arrives, it doesn't just disrupt them physically, it violates their entire cosmology. As writers and readers, we can pull a lot from this. Fairy folklore is filled with this idea, iron as disruption, as danger, but this tale makes it personal. It gives the taboo a story. It gives it a history, a flavour, a cosmic grief. And that grief is going to play a massive role in what happens next. The fairy and the lover. Now there was a long, pretty stretch of water near which lived a handsome lad who loved nothing better than to go out on moonlit nights and see the fairies dance or listen to their music. This youth fell in love with one of the fairies, whose beauty was great beyond description. At last, unable to control his passion, he rushed into the midst of the fairy company, seized the beautiful one, and rushed back to his home with his prize in his arms. This was in true caveman fashion. When the other fairies hurried to rescue her, they found the man's house shut. They dared not touch the door, for it was covered over with iron studs and bands, and bolted with the metal which they most abhorred. The young man immediately began to profess his love to the fairy maid, hoping to win her to be his wife. For a long time she refused, moping all day and night. While weeping many saltwater tears, she declared she was too homesick to live. Nevertheless, the lover persevered, finding herself locked in with iron bars while gratings, bolts and creaking hinges were all about her, and unable to return to her people. The fairy first thought out a plan of possible escape. Then she agreed to become the man's wife. She resolved, at least, that without touching it, she should oil all the ironwork and stop all the noise. She was a smart fairy, and was sure she could outwit the man, even if he were so strong and had every sort of iron everywhere in order to keep her, as it were, in a prison. Okay, let's break this down. We've moved from mythic culture clash to something deeply personal, a love story, but one built on imbalance. This isn't a noble courtship, it's abduction. The narrator even calls it caveman fashion. It's not a compliment though, it's a callback. This youth, though Cymric, behaves like the Stone Age men before him. He sees, he wants, he takes it. But he makes one strategic error. His house, his doors, his world, they're covered in iron. And in doing so, he doesn't just kidnap a fairy. He traps her in a prison of cultural unalivement. She's not just homesick, she's spiritually suffering. And that sets the stage for the emotional chess match that follows. For readers, this is a turn from the legend into drama. For writers, it's a brilliant use of tone. This isn't just magical romance, it's a tragedy described as a love story. Before Shakespeare ever took his first breath. And it's about to get complicated. Name as power. So pretending she loved him dearly, she said, "I will not be your wife, but if you can find out my name, I will gladly become your servant." Easily won, thought the lover to himself. Yet the game was harder to play than he supposed. It was like playing blind man's bluff or hunt the slipper. Though he made guesses of every name he could think of, he was never hot, and got no nearer the thing sought than if his eyes were bandaged. All the time he was deeper and deeper in love with the lovely fairy maid. But one night, on returning home, he saw in a turf bog a group of fairies sitting on a log. At once he thought they might be talking about their lost sister, so he crept up quite near them to hear, and soon found that he had guessed right. After a long discussion, finding themselves still at a loss on how to recover, he heard one of them sigh and say, "Oh, Shushi, my sister, how can you live with a mortal?" "Enough," said the young man to himself, "I've got it." Then, crawling away noiselessly, he ran all the way back to his house and unlocked the door. Once inside the room, he called out the servant's name, "Shushi, Shushi." Astonished at hearing her name, she cried out, "What mortal has betrayed me? For surely no fairy would tell on me. Alas, my fate, my fate." But in her own mind, the struggle and the fear were over. She had bravely striven to keep her fairyhood, and in the battle of wits, had lost. She would not be wife, but what a wise, superb, and faithful servant she made. Names. In fairy tales, names are power. Rumpelstiltskin, the fair folk, the unnamed king. To speak a name is to claim agency, sometimes even to break enchantments. But this story does something a little bit different. Shishi doesn't vanish when her name is spoken. She collapses inward. There's no transformation, only resignation. Why? Because this wasn't a battle of strength. It was a battle of cleverness. She believed she could outwit the mortal, that she could control her captivity, bargain her way into survival. But when he says her name, it means she's been seen. And in being seen, her power fractures. She hasn't lost her magic, she's lost her autonomy. And here's where the tale twists beautifully. Rather than vanish or flee, she becomes the best servant imaginable. And that's what makes the story so haunting. She doesn't escape. She adapts. And every moment of her obedience carries an undercurrent of sorrow. Marriage, motherhood, and vows. Everything prospered under her hand. The house and the farm became models. Not twice, but 3 times a day the cows, milked by her, yielded milk, unusually rich in cream. In the market, her butter excelled in quality and price all others. Meanwhile, the passion of the lover abated not one jot nor for an instant. His perseverance finally won. She agreed to become his wife, but only on one condition. "You must never strike me with iron," she said. "If you do, I'll be free to leave you and go back to my relatives in the fairy family." A hearty laugh from the happy lover greeted this remark made by the lovely creature, once his servant but now his betrothed. He thought the condition was very easy to obey. So they were married, and no couple in all the land seemed to be happier. Once, twice, the cradle was filled. It rocked with the new treasures that had life and were more dear than farm or home or wealth in barns or cattle, cheese and butter. A boy and a girl were theirs, and the mother's care was unremitting day and night. Even though the happy father grew richer every year and bought farm after farm until he owned 5,000 acres, he valued more than these possessions his lovely wife and beautiful children. Yet this very delight and affection made him less vigilant, yes, even less careful, concerning the promise he had once given to his fairy wife, who still held to the ancient ideas of the fairy family in regard to iron. Once, one of his finest mares had given birth to a filly, which, when the day of the great fair came, he was determined to sell it at a high price. So with a halter on his arm, he went out to catch her. But she was a lively creature, so frisky that it was much like his first attempt to win his fairy bride. It almost looked as if she were a cave girl running away from a lover who had a lasso in his hand. This is where the story softens and starts to trick us a bit. Shushi, once abducted and outwitted, becomes a wife and a mother. She agrees to love, she agrees to build, but still she sets one unbreakable rule: do not touch me with iron. That line is loaded. It's not just a condition of marriage, it's a final link to her former self, a hard boundary, the last sliver of identity in a world that has nearly taken everything else. And for a time it worked. The house thrives, the land yields, their children flourish. This part of the story reads like a fairy tale ending, but it's not end. It's the calm before the inevitable, because here's the truth. You can marry across culture, you can raise children and buy land, but if one person's deepest boundaries are never truly respected, that love is still very fragile, and sooner or later, something cracks. The iron strike and the shattering. The lively and frolicsome beast scampered here and there, grazing as she stopped, as if she were determined to put off her capture as long as possible. So, calling his wife, the two of them together tried their skill to catch the filly. This time, leaving the halter in the house, the man took bit and bridle, and the two managed to get the pretty creature into a corner. But when they had almost captured her, she dashed away again. By this time, the man was so vexed that he lost his temper, and he who does that usually loses the game, while he who controls the wrath within wins. Mad as a flaming fire, he lost his brains also, and threw the bit and bridle and whole harness after the fleet animal. Alas, alas, alas! The wife had started to run after the filly, and the iron bit struck her on the cheek. It did not hurt, but he had broken his vow. Now came the surprise of his life. It was as if at one moment a flash of lightning had made all things bright, and in another second was inky darkness. He saw his lovely wife, one moment active and fleet as a deer, in another, in the twinkling of an eye, nothing was there. She had vanished. After this, there was a lonely home, empty of its light and cheer. But by living with human beings, a new idea and form of life had transformed this fairy, and a new spell was laid upon her. Mother love had been awakened in her heart. Here it is, the moment that was fated from the first clang of iron in this tale, the breaking of the vow. And it's not a dramatic blow, it's not a sword or battle, it's a careless moment, a reflex, a flare of frustration. And that's what makes it hit so hard, because he didn't mean to harm her. He didn't mean to, he just forgot. And in doing so, he touched her with the very thing she feared the most. The tragedy isn't in the injury, it's in the violation. Because the real promise wasn't about iron, it was about trust, about boundaries. And when those boundaries are broken, not by cruelty, but by carelessness, it still counts. Writers, this is a masterclass in emotional pacing. The most devastating moments aren't always violent. Sometimes they're quiet. A gesture, a crack, a wife who vanishes mid-motion and leaves the world behind. The floating island and the fairy mother. Henceforth, though the law of the fairy world would not allow her to touch again the realm of earth, she, having once been wife and parent, could not forget the babies born of her body. So, making a sword raft, a floating island, she came up at night, and often, while these three mortals lived, this fairy mother would spend hours tenderly talking to her husband and her two children, who were by now a big boy and girl, as they stood on the lake shore. On his part, the father did not think it an ideal arrangement, as some modern married folks might do, to be thus separated, wife and husband, one from another. But by her coming as near as could be allowed, she showed her undying love. Even today, good people sometimes see a little island floating on the lake, and this they point out as the place where the fairy mother was wont to come and hold converse with her dear ones. When they merrily eat the pink delicacy called floating island, moving it about with a spoon on its yellow lake of eggs and cream, they call this the fairy mother's rocking chair. The end. I don't know about you, but this part just kind of breaks me. Because after all the cultural tension, the magic, the taboo, this is what's left. A wife who can't be touched, and a floating island, half real, half myth, drifting just out of reach. The ending doesn't restore anything. It doesn't undo the pain. It does acknowledge it though. But instead of vengeance or finality, it offers grace. A fairy who chooses to return, not to punish, but to love. To rock her children from afar. To stand at the edge of the world because she can no longer inhabit it, but her heart refuses to forget. And that's what makes this story legendary. It's not about the power of fairy lore, it's about the power of love that transcends it. So, what can we as writers and readers take away from the touch of iron? Let me give you 5 key takeaways, forged in myth and sharpened for your writing craft. 1. Layered world building. The world isn't explained, it's revealed through taboos, symbols and behaviour. Iron isn't just a material, it's a motive, a worldview, a threat. Number 2, meaningful symbolism. Everything, and I mean everything, carries a metaphor. Clay pots versus iron tools, name versus power, a floating island versus a fixed home. Number 3, emotional turns. This story doesn't rush into climax, it lulls us into comfort, then strikes. That's what makes the lost hit harder. 4, ethical complexity. Nobody is fully right or fully wrong here. Shushi isn't framed as a victim, but she's not free. The man isn't cruel, but he isn't careful either. And that space, that's where the best stories live. Number 5, a haunting final image. That floating island is the literary version of a ghost. It moves, it returns, and it reminds us, some love doesn't disappear, it just changes form. Writers, if your story can leave readers with a final image that lingers in their heart, you've done your job. And this tale? Oh, this tale does it masterfully. Hi. Alright, thank you for sailing through the mist of time with me today. If you enjoyed the touch of iron, hit like, drop a comment and tell me what story broke your heart in the softest way. And if you want more tales like this, where folklore meets deep storytelling craft, subscribe and join the community. I'm MT Lynx, and this was Storybite, and I'll see you next time when we uncover the next strange and beautiful truth buried in an old tale. And now you know. I'll see you in the next video. This one right here.